a sorority full of women are at holidays, getting ready to go home and off on break and stuff. But of course, their plans are interrupted by a stalker slash killer who basically terrorizes them and then slowly kills them off one by one. If this sounds familiar, it's the plot of many a horror movie since probably the 80s and stuff. But we're going to talk about Black Christmas, which in the 70s was kind of the kind of trendsetter for its day. And before we dive into that, I wanted to kind of ask though first, when we do like kind of these remakes and stuff, how do we kind of like, where do we separate the line between story and then kind of like making a point or like kind of, a theme or an idea and stuff? Because I feel like we'll certainly get more to it in the more modern version, but sometimes I think we cross that line of where, you kind of like set aside story to some degree to kind of make your point and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is very much the case with the 2019 version. So yeah, the 1974 version, quite a strange movie, quite disturbing, I would say, quite creepy and unsettling in its use of first-person perspective, which was quite groundbreaking at the time. And there's the morality in it is quite confusing when you look at it against the trend of other 80s slashers. I think if it does make a point, it's very hard to determine what it is, especially on first viewing without digging into it a lot more. Whereas you contrast that with the 2019 version, the point is so hammered in your face that it's like the story is, they just almost give up on the story by the end of the movie. It's like, well, I mean, can you actually even enjoy a movie where their political agenda is so heavily embedded into it? I did not, but yeah, I guess it depends on who you are. But
yeah, as you suggested before we started, I think for me it was interesting to see the 1974 version first, and to see, like you said, how groundbreaking it was. Because before that, I can't think of any horror movie that used a lot of things that have since become tropes and conventions, if you will, for the horror genre and stuff. And I think it's interesting how that one took the idea of the babysitter being kind of attacked and stuff like that, and really just made it a full-on kind of story around it. It also, I think, another thing kind of it brought out this idea of this kind of anonymous killer and stuff. Where, like you said, using that first person perspective and stuff like that really was, has been even like parodied, with the Scream series and stuff like that. But then at the time, there wasn't much that kind of really resembled it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for those not unaware, apparently Black Christmas was based on an urban legend, which is the babysitter and the man upstairs, which is wherever, anytime, the babysitter receives an anonymous call and it says, "Have you checked the children?" And she goes, "This, it's just a prank call." And every time the phone rings and it says, "Have you checked the children?" he's killing one of the kids upstairs. And so by the time she realizes, oh, this may not be a prank, all the children are dead. So the sort of ultimate underlying message of this is that it's a sort of comment on motherhood, in saying that, if you are self-absorbed and you're not caring after your, hovering over your kids, you're going to be a bad mother and someone's going to come and get your children. It's kind of what I interpreted that urban legend to be. And in Black Christmas, some of that moralizing about how women transition to motherhood is embedded in it as well, because you've got this image of Claire, the first victim, wrapped up. She's in a rocking chair with the doll in her lap. Is a very kind of motherly figure,
right?
And she's in this window the whole time through the movie, which is another weird aspect, which we'll get into later. On display almost, like the killer's Christmas present.
Yeah.
And the other women in it, I think, to some degree represent, you know, how you're not going to become a good mother. One of them is like verging on alcoholic or drinks too much. Another one's getting an abortion. The only one that's weird for me is the one that doesn't seem to do anything but just gets killed anyway. That's the one that's very sort of random.
Right.
But that seems to me like the undertone, if you will, for some of Black Christmas. And it has this weird, and the moralizing becomes more blatant in the 80s slasher movies, where any girl who has sex immediately gets killed by Freddy or Jason.
Right.
And that's this weird sort of connection of, you know, all these slasher movies based on some sort of people's idea of women's morals and motherhood. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's interesting how we were seeing this at the time where, you know, this whole sexual revolution has kind of really come to fruition, right? Where it's around the 70s that, you know, like with the birth control pill being kind of available, that then, you know, like kind of women have this choice now and stuff. And so the whole abortion versus choice thing kind of started really kind of coming to the foreground as to, you know, like kind of what are women's rights, and, you know, like kind of that they have choices, that it's not as though that like they all have to get married, all have to be, you know, mothers and stuff. It was just something at that time was like really like, you know, revolutionary. Now it's like, of course, things we take for granted and everything, which I think in some ways is echoed in, like, you know, as we transition to like the newer versions of stuff, where it's less about that idea, like you said, where the abortion being like a huge thing and stuff, and then it becomes more like about, as we will see, about kind of like women's how they're treated, and you know, their position of power or not and stuff. The other thing I think that's interesting is, you know, like the fact that like it's set at Christmas time, right? Like what do you, what for you, like kind of like why the use of, you know, this holiday, right? That's normally like kept sacrosanct and, like, you know, and sacrilege to kind of, you know, to put it these terms.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's a very, I think this sort of leads into a more kind of, it's a comment about how cynical the movie is in a way, and how it's a very, I find it quite a nihilistic and cynical movie in many respects.
Yeah, but it was.
But we also represent, you know, Christmas is a time for family. The nativity, we think of, you know, Mary with baby Jesus, and, you know, that ties back to this whole theme of the babysitter and everything. Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like the message of the movie is, if you don't spend Christmas with your family, you're almost certainly going to get killed. You know, I don't know if they're trying. I mean, it just seems like at every turn, the filmmakers trying to make an incredibly kind of cynical comment on society.
Yeah, it's interesting how we had with It's a Wonderful Life that, you know, the spirit of Christmas being about friendship and generosity, and you know, this kind of the fruits of our labors, and kind of, you know, gathering around family and stuff like that. And then we have Scrooge, which, like, kind of, you know, with A Christmas Carol, that it's you know, to that you, if you're cynical, then you're like kind of this lonely kind of, you know, miserly person and stuff, or you're this generous kind of, you know, maybe you're poor but you're generous and you have your family and friends around you and stuff. And then, you know, like now we have this kind of very dark kind of idea of, like you said, of where, you know, okay, if you're gonna you know, turn your back on the Christmas spirit, then, like you said, then you're gonna get killed. You know, like, and that's your fate for.
But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, everything from, it's weird in that you're watching it and this killer seems to have such free reign over the house. He's there. There's even one bit where he's making a whole bunch of noise, and you just think, surely someone's noticing it. But because the various sorority girls are either sort of squabbling between themselves or something, you know, everyone totally ignores it. So that it's almost like they purposefully made this killer almost like advertising that he's killing these people. And there's no social cohesion between the girls in the house. They're always sort of fighting and arguing about something. And the mother, their sort of mother, that's supposed to be looking after them is just trying to find alcohol everywhere.
Yeah.
And then the police turn up too late. You can't rely on them, and then they end up convicting the wrong man.
Right.
And then it's almost like the killer is just like, he's got the body in the window at the top. It's like, yeah. And the funny thing is, you know, you hear of stuff that's really blatant like that in real life and true crime, and you just think, God, how could this stuff happen? And that's what I think is they really accurately capture this kind of chaotic cruelty that can really kind of play out with real psychopaths, I think, which I think is really unsettling when you watch it.
Yeah, I think that's some of the things that, like, again, like, I feel like became more tropes for the horror genre, of like the incompetent authorities, of like, you know, like the people kind of bickering among themselves and stuff. It's like kind of just like now, like, you know, we just are so used to seeing them in the horror movies and stuff, but at the same time, though, it's interesting how, like, you know, a movie like this kind of really set the trend to do these things, like, you know, like, and it just, I don't know, like you said, maybe in some ways it creates like kind of this environment that like is just ripe for kind of, you know, somebody like the killer stuff. And I wonder, like, also if you know, if it is some kind of commentary about, like, you know, the view about people, and that, I don't know, like, that given just maybe like the whole idea where different times on an island, right, a bunch of kids will just, you know, run rampant and stuff, in like a setting like this where it's a, you know, group of women, or it could be maybe even like just people in general, stuff like that, that then they are alone and you know, like kind of isolated and stuff, then you know, killer would just really go to town and stuff.
Yeah, maybe that's the point. It's like, you know, if there's no social cohesion, or people don't look out for each other, you know, you're easy prey. Maybe that's the point.
And certainly, like the dead mother, though, like, you know, it was like kind of just almost comical, her, you know, like obsession with alcohol. Like, it was just like, you know, where is she going to, you know, like kind of have her stash, you know, like kind of in the next scene and stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of, I would say the first half of the movie, they do kind of, it's weird because they almost like play that stuff for laughs, and Margot Kidder is a bit over the top with actually sort of like spelling out fellatio to the cop, but the cop doesn't get it. You know, it's kind of, it's a bit over the top, and it takes way too long. But I mean, the last half of the movie is when it, but then the drama with Jess and the abortion and her boyfriend is very kind of convincing, very gritty in comparison. And the last half of the movie really kind of, is the real sort of tone of the movie, I'd say. Yeah,
I think this is also an interesting place for Margot Kidder's career, because this was pre-Superman, and you know, she was, I guess, just a, you know, like just regular kind of actress at that point and stuff like that. So it was interesting how, I don't know, I guess for her, helped to move her along to like kind of the next thing, which, you know, like just a couple movies later, that was like kind of her roll into like stardom, I guess, and stuff.
Yeah, I think it also made me appreciate just how many ideas that John Carpenter stole for Halloween, or borrowed, but just how much he still added so much kind of refinement and other, you know, interesting touches to Halloween that really kind of set it quite apart from this. This comes across as very nihilistic, whereas Halloween comes across as very structured and a more kind of complete package, I would say.
Definitely. So let's see. In terms of the 2006 one and stuff, I feel like that one just wasted no time in getting to that first kill. I mean, you know, it's kind of like just slam, like kind of, you know, there you are, like kind of in like the first few minutes.
Well, it's, you know, attention spans have waned since 1974. We've had 2 decades of horror movies. You know, you've got to get people's attention quickly. So yeah, I mean, there were lots of things that I kind of found a bit confusing. They spent so much time trying to establish the backstory for the killer. And the unfortunate thing is you saw his face right from the beginning, which killed any kind of tension. Why they made him yellow is beyond me.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. It was like, what was that about? Like, kind of.
I mean, everything was so monochrome. Maybe in the movie, they just thought, oh, this is almost like it's an art house filter for the killer or something. But it made no sense to me.
I think part of it too, like it seemed also that the overall like kind of story was just such a jumbled kind of mess of stuff that like without that artificial kind of coloring, so to speak, I don't even know if we would be able to kind of tell like who was who, like who was the killer, right?
I think you're right. And it jumped around so much. First of all, it was 1970 something, then it was 1990, then it was this, and it jumped around so many points in his life, and this elaborate way of trying to understand the parental neglect had somehow created a psychopath. And then there was the whole incest thing as well. And it just really, I mean, it was kind of interesting, I suppose, that they had a second killer and they had a woman killer this time, which was kind of interesting. So, but it got very muddled, and I really couldn't keep track of, this is to show you, I mean, I paid quite a lot of attention to the 74 version. I was trying to see which character was which of the sorority girls in 2000, and I couldn't make any sense of that at all. And then there was the sister who shows up, and
they seem to have just lost the dead mother. Like there was this kind of effeminate guy that kind of like seemed to kind of tag along, and I thought he was like maybe gay, and then like apparently he was like one of the boyfriends. Like kind of that was kind of fuzzy.
Yeah. I mean, I think what was interesting for me was that this boyfriend who, I think, well, because they had the whole revenge porn part in it. Right. They had a videotape of one girl who was there crying over there with this guy and the laptop, and she just leaves the laptop open, freeze framed on her with the guy very conveniently, and this guy spends half the movie calling all the women bitches. Right. And just like, yeah, he would have kicked out quite a lot earlier, I think, from that house. But it was, and everything was so dark. It was like, surely somebody would have turned on the lights at some point. I mean, it seemed like from 1974 to 2006, they never had lights in that house except for a few random Christmas lights. Didn't make much sense. So.
That almost seemed like another reason why, like, they had the killer yellow, just so you could like kind of see him even more or something and stuff. And then a funny kind of, and I don't know about the connection because I didn't read anything that kind of made it, but Sin City had this one character too that had that kind of yellow, and so that was made before this. So I don't know, like, what the connection is there, if there, it's a specific one.
I think it's definitely a case of somebody in the production of the studio saying, hey, Sin City was kind of monochrome and they had like a killer who was yellow. Why don't we make this guy yellow? That's kind of about the level of intent that I could see.
Like where it's like kind of, like, why don't we, but then without like kind of the same, like Sin City though certainly had a more artistic kind of reason for doing that. And you saw it like kind of, it was very clear as to like kind of, like you said, most of it was, well, actually it was, purely monochrome except for that and stuff. And so it was very intentional for how, that was handled. Whereas for this one, it just, it definitely seemed like, like, oh, why don't we? Like kind of more that kind of here, I guess.
Yeah, very strange. The only weird thing about it for me was that it was also written, as I was saying to you earlier, by the guy who wrote the 1974 version, Roy Moore. So all this elaborate backstory must be somehow, you have to kind of lend credence to it by his involvement, I suppose.
Maybe it was like stuff that he, like kind of wanted to include in the original, but then like, hey, here's my chance to kind of, get out all these great ideas I had for the first one.
But of course, it's completely to the detriment of the movie. And like we've said before, the horror is created by having something that's where you can't understand the motives, where you don't see the face, where you can't understand or comprehend this horror. And even in the first one, the phone calls are indecipherable. You don't really know if it's him or multiple people. And that, I mean, they don't really have the effect of being scary, I wouldn't say in the 74 one, but they are kind of, they throw you off because you're kind of, you're still trying to kind of work out what it is. So you can't understand the motive or what the relationship is.
Certainly by 2006 now we have, cell phone technology. So it wasn't the same idea where you had to be by the phone, like kind of in 74. So that was like to me, that was like a very central element of the original that, like kind of the phone was be calling and then they even had like I remember the scenes where the guy was like physically tracing the phone line to the you know, specific kind of routing and stuff like that. I thought that was like really, you know, something else that really stood out.
Yeah, it was. It was very blatant in the way. I mean, most other movies, when they talk about tracing a call, you never see the guy running around trying to trace. This one, it was almost like, oh, yeah, nice little documentary about how old phone companies used to work. It was kind of quite interesting in a way. It took me a little bit out of the movie, but yeah. But that was interesting as well. In the location of the killer was kind of dealt with in different ways in all three movies, and that you didn't know where they were in the first one. It was an anonymous call. The second one, they used the victim's cell phones as a way of having that proximity, which I thought was actually quite clever way of dealing with it. And then they reverted back to hiding the location of the killers with the text messages in the 2019 version. So it was very interesting the way they kind of how they came up with that decision for where the location of the killer should be in the movie space, so to speak.
Was it? This is part that I have to admit that I kind of forgot or lost track. Was it both versions that had an outside killing as well, where like, you know, it was a girl in the park that was killed and stuff, that was like almost like a distraction or red herring and stuff?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the weirder things about the 74 version.
Okay.
And they, again, heightened the general sort of random nihilistic nature of the movie.
Yeah.
But in the 2006 one, I don't remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember that as well.
And I don't think that was the case in the 2019 version either.
Yeah, definitely.
The body counts are obviously higher in the later movies as well. So, yeah.
Well, I guess that's a transition to the 2019 version where...
The 2019 version, yeah, wow. What a movie.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Well, I guess that's a transition to the 2019 version where...
The 2019 version, yeah, wow. What a movie. Yeah, so, I mean, in this one, clearly, whereas you know, revenge porn was the 2006 bit of social commentary, and perhaps, you know, women's role as mothers were the you know, the commentary of the 74. 2019, well, it's misogynists versus women, you know, in a grand sort of battle royale. Right.
That's really the huge change, right? That like, instead of like being this anonymous killer, now like it's interesting how that's the original impression you get, and also from the trailers and all that. But we quickly realize, you know, like kind of, again, spoilers alert of bound stuff, that you know, there's this kind of conspiracy going on with like supernatural elements and stuff. So I think that's like it was like a huge leap and departure from, you know, like, because the second one, the 2006, still had somewhat of this semi-anonymous killer, even though he was, like you said, revealed like right off the bat and stuff. But then now we had that the anonymous killer was almost like a red herring in this case as to what was really going on, and then we quickly find out that it's this kind of secret society, kind of, you know, like more like something. What was that?
It was fueled by an old statue that bled out of its eyes. Right. Pure, unadulterated misogyny that gave people super strength, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it. I think for me there were a few things that why did the killers use bow and arrows? I think bow and arrows in 2019 are about the least threatening weapon I can think of. It's like if someone pointed the bow and arrow, I'd be like, I have a pretty good chance of I could just run at you probably, and you'd probably miss. It's not that easy, and let alone get a kill shot, you know. It's yeah, I did not find that particularly frightening. I mean, there were also lots of other kind of interesting little commentary bits in it, in that there's one line of dialogue in the 74 version and the 2006 where, after some of the phone calls, one of the girls says, it's best that you don't provoke this kind of person. Whereas they kind of flipped that in the 2019 version, where not only did they provoke them, they did a song and dance number to provoke them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, we're not afraid to provoke misogynists anymore. We're going to call them out and sing it back to them. You know,
and I thought that was really odd too, how they you know, like kind of like you said, they used the song as a way to kind of really stir the pot, so to speak. And you know, even though it was supposed to have this kind of somewhat feminist kind of theme and stuff, but they dress in these outfits, right, that are like kind of, you know, like something out of Mean Girls, where it's like this the sexy Santa kind of thing and stuff. And I guess I almost kind of question, you know, like kind of like what was the point that they were trying to make with that, I guess.
I think the point is that they're trying to say it's a woman's right to not be. You shouldn't be afraid of this, or calling it out. Is the, I think, the underlying message of it, and there they hammer that point home. But the whole thing is this idea of how far do you go with this, of calling out people. Whereas I can't remember her name. One of the surviving girls. But anyway, you know, she's constantly calling people out, and the main character, I want to say her name is perhaps Riley. She's sort of the only bit she does. She kind of generally agrees, but goes, "But you know, I'm not entirely sure this is. You know, maybe there's two sides to this coin." And she's ultimately like the kind of the main heroine of the story. But it did make me think of, like, if you get killed based on your kind of moral behavior in the 80s, what is the criteria for survival in a 2019 horror movie? And the only conclusion I came to with this one was that the more woke you were, the more likely you were to survive.
Yeah.
If you were totally woke, you're okay.
Yeah. And I feel like that's part of, like, one of the biggest flaws to this approach to movie making. Is like, you know, this, and I feel like now we're almost like kind of bordering on this whole Star Wars thing, and some which I don't want to really get into on this discussion, but we're, you know, when you wrap characters in this thing called plot armor, it really, like, kind of, to me, it feels more like the whole, you know, thing of fables, and kind of like why, like, nowadays we've become a lot more jaded towards fables and stuff. Because we realize, or we believe anyway now, that life doesn't work that way. That, you know, it isn't always good, you know, like kind of triumphing over evil. We want it to, and we love when that happens and stuff. But the reality is that different times, like, you know, there are kind of evil people that kind of get off scot-free. There are kind of people who, like, you know, that never get caught too and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely something to be said for dealing with, you know, rape on university campuses and misogyny in academia. I'm not sure using a supernatural statue and a secret cult is perhaps the most subtle or thought-provoking way of doing that. But, yeah. I mean, I guess they're kind of, maybe they're sort of, I guess, to some defense, you could say, you know, you don't rely on the authorities to catch your killer, and you shouldn't rely on the authorities to, you know, bring equality and justice to people who've been wronged in these kind of scenarios.
But I think it's like also this idea that, like, when you know, talk about, like, kind of these, you know, fraternity brothers being kind of, you know, blessed with this kind of, you know, this stuff coming from the statue and everything like that, to go forth to in their place of society and everything, it just becomes so blatantly transparent that, like, it just, I think at that point, you know, it makes you kind of just roll your eyes as to, like, kind of like, okay, yeah, you know, we get it and stuff like that. And,
I mean, at a fairly fundamental level, it doesn't even really make sense, because a misogynist isn't there to kill a woman, it's there to dominate them. And they just went around killing everyone.
Right.
Like, you know, they may as well have been like a very sort of hardline homosexual brotherhood that hated all women and wanted them eradicated from the earth or something. It didn't really make any sense that they were misogynists, because that's not really, yeah, I don't think that's really how a misogynist thinks, perhaps. And he says trying not to be a misogynist.
You know, like, I thought that it was interesting to see Cary Elwes in the role and stuff. There's something that he kind of brings to it that I think it's where I don't know. There's something about his character that, like, he, you know, like, certainly like he's best known for you know, the Princess Bride and stuff like that. And I guess he's one of those kind of strange actors that, like, for some reason I can't think of any other kind of major roles he's had, like, kind of, you know, since then. And
Yeah.
but he just, at the same time though, he did kind of bring something to the role though, like kind of at least made it entertaining, if not like kind of convincing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he did, with what he was given, he did a reasonable job, I suppose. But it's he wasn't really menacing in any way,
Yeah, that's true.
shape, or form.
Right.
And the fact that somehow all the girls seemed to survive, and there was just like this massive kind of one-on-one fight at the end. It's like, well, this isn't a horror movie.
Right.
There's nothing frightening going on here at all.
That's a great point though. That like, like, to me, you may have like kind of this, you know, battle royale and stuff, but then that doesn't make a horror movie. Like, kind of, you know, it's the things that where there's this things lurking in the shadows. There's this kind of tension being built and stuff, and really like when you had like kind of these blatant killings throughout the movie and stuff, there really wasn't any tension built. You know, like kind of it just kind of was just basically like, okay, you know, this kind of thing is happening, and then and like I think to me it's the South Park creators. They talk about this idea that if you say, you know, if you're telling a story and you go, and then this happens is up, and then this happens, that's not really storytelling. You know, kind of, it's like you have to have a situation where this, you know, is about to happen, but then, like, kind of, you know, like it has to have that but then, that like that's where it becomes storytelling, instead of like a laundry list of activities, or, you know, like kind of something where you're just kind of like going down the list that you're kind of checking off the blocks and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it makes you wonder if they just decided, okay, we so want to not have the women as the sort of the scared victims running away and have them fighting back, that we're actually prepared to sort of throw out the whole notion of this being something where there is a killer playing, you know, there is some horror playing on people's insecurities, you know, which is the key axis which a horror movie revolves around. So yeah, you know, and that maybe they're trying to break the mold. Fair play to them. I don't think it worked, but okay.
I mean, I feel like they, you know, like had good intentions, and there was possibility, like kind of, you know, certainly, you know, I'm trying to think of some other horror movies where they've actually done well with this idea of a secret society and stuff. I guess, to be honest, to some degree, the whole Dan Brown series, they kind of do, like, even though it's not considered necessarily horror per se, but it's at least a thriller and everything. The idea, like, kind of this vast conspiracy with the Da Vinci Code, and I feel like that kind of works. And this movie seems like it, you know, tried to do something like that, but it just was a thing of where they didn't really do that very well. And then also, like, you know, certainly we pointed out how the horror wasn't done very well. So instead, it was kind of like they just, you know, like, okay, let's pat it down and kind of get it out the door kind of thing.
Well, the key difference there is that the Da Vinci Code has lots of meticulous research into Renaissance painters' history in their lives.
Yeah.
And this has a supernatural statue that bleeds blood out of its eyes. So, you know, it's a bit of a shortcut.
Right. Just a bit. Just a bit.
Yeah.
And then I thought like one interesting element though was having the one sister like kind of betraying the rest of them. You know, like I thought that was an interesting kind of, you know, not necessarily a twist per se. Like it was just something I thought that like was done okay. Like kind of it was like certainly had a point. You know, like kind of where, you know, we have in the whole MeToo thing and stuff like that, that there's different women that don't necessarily support it, and here we're kind of like, you know, basically vilifying like kind of this one gal who, like, you know, she's a traitor, and kind of, you know, like we're just basically slamming on all the hate and all the kind of things that like I think we our views of like kind of women who don't support this the current movement and stuff.
And she got killed too by the guys. So,
Oh yeah,
take note. Any people who might want to sympathize with misogynists, they're going to get you too.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's a great point that, like you said, though, is like kind of that's not necessarily how misogyny works, but they want to kill everybody.
It's, it didn't really I don't know. Very funny vehicle to make your points, I thought, but anyway, yeah.
I mean, I think that like we're the intention kind of, like I can see the point and stuff is the idea that like, like a classical thriller is how you have the system kind of being the real threat to, like kind of individuals and stuff. So that kind of makes sense and everything. So the idea of like kind of, making it to be like the whole women caught in this kind of man's, like kind of domination and stuff like that. That kind of works to a degree, but like we've kind of said, like kind of many different ways and stuff like that. But executing this way, where a really thinly veiled, like kind of story, just kind of really almost does a detriment to the whole thing and stuff.
Yeah, it does in a way. And the only way I see this kind of working as a movie is it being pitched to someone who's about to fund the project. In that someone's sitting there going, and you're going, it's going to cover like, sorority rape. It's going to cover, women's empowerment. It's going to be sort of empowered women, check. It's going to be a remake of a classic horror movie. Somebody goes, oh, how can this fail? Well, if you just do all of that really blatantly all the way through the movie and there's no symbolic sort of tying back or any subtlety or in how it's done, then this is what you get.
And I guess the scary part for me is that, like, as far as the current numbers, I mean, it's only not been out that long, and it seemed like it like the viewing I attended and stuff, there's maybe like a handful of people in the theater with me and stuff, so it seemed like a bomb and stuff like that. But from what I've seen, like kind of like at least the latest Wikipedia entry and stuff, the numbers are like kind of it's already been profitable. So that to me is like the scary part, is that like that means that like at maybe another 10 years or so, there's gonna be another Black Christmas.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there will be. I mean, I guess is that sort of do we need subtext anymore in movies? Do we need subtlety? Am I expecting too much now? Can we just sort of blatantly just sort of say all the points we're trying to do out loud? Rather than Bruce Willis actually fighting terrorists in the tower, you can just say, I'm not really sure about foreigners, generally speaking, and then just sort of gives a 5-minute speech on, immigration policy in part of the new Die Hard movie or something. Is that where we're sort of bound with movies? It's just a very odd sort of step for me. But.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of stuff that like we probably would have really knocked a propaganda film back in the day, right? Like, like something made by the Third Reich and stuff like that. We would have like kind of criticized some kind of things like, okay, that's clearly propaganda. It's ridiculous. Like it's not art and stuff like that. But meanwhile, here we are, like kind of doing this kind of, left-wing propaganda essentially and stuff. But it's like that's kind of woke then, like kind of that's then okay, and everything.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm probably not woke enough, both literally and symbolically, because it is quite late here, to comment really coherently on it.
So, any other kind of last thoughts as to what is it that kind of is still missing, though, like kind of out of these and stuff that, in other words, like, if we did a remake in 10 years or something like that, what would make it be more worthwhile to kind of do and stuff, instead of just doing like a either out there kind of story or a blatant kind of, more moral tale and stuff?
Well, okay, so the two key things, there's a few key sort of things that I think the original idea revolves around. One is the location of the killer is much closer than you expect.
Right.
So having them all in cults in various places around the university, that doesn't work for me. It needs to be a story about a killer in a house and you are there. It's almost like a John Carpenter style siege movie. You're trapped in this house with the killer.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know if they need to be scuttling in and out the floorboards and stuff like the 2006 one either. But, you know, that, I think just I actually kind of like the cynicism of the first one, the sort of the random nature of it. I would incorporate that again. I would think of clever ways of, I would think of clever ways of doing it. But, you know, you can make the location anonymous through the use of technology. I also kind of like the commentary on motherhood. I would actually like to sort of see more of that as one of the core things. What does it mean? You know, what are mothers scared of? What does motherhood mean in the modern world? And have that underpinning a lot of the story in a modern version, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, like kind of that is something seems to have really been diluted and lost, is the idea of, you know, because certainly like kind of with the nativity, you know, like being a central kind of part of the Christmas, you know, celebration stuff, it kind of makes sense. It makes more sense as a connection to have, you know, motherhood, like kind of where, if anything, that's can create some of the tension of where we're struggling with the idea of motherhood in the modern day and stuff because of, like, you know, things like, you know, birth control, things like abortion being debated and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of something that, like, you know, without doing it in a tale of like kind of, you know, morals and stuff like that, that if you basically made it a central element of a woman trying to come to terms with, like, kind of, should I get this abortion and stuff, or for that matter, like maybe like somebody's like debating about like kind of continuing on this relationship with somebody that, you know, will lead to this path of like kind of, you know, the traditional path of stuff, but meanwhile she is thinking, well, why do I have to go kind of like this way that's always been and stuff? And it's something that, like, maybe now we take more for granted in this day and age, but I think it's something that, like, as far as I've, you know, heard from, you know, like kind of, you know, quote unquote millennials, they do still struggle with it. It's kind of like where on the one hand they have all the freedoms and choices and stuff, on the other they different times almost don't want it because it's sometimes easier to, like, kind of, you know, when the path's laid out for you versus, like, you know, like kind of that paradox of choice idea where, you know, you have so many options that then, you know, how do you choose which one, and how do you know which one will make you happy and stuff?
Yeah, and how do you know, was, you know, any expectant mother will know, how do you know which news source or health thing to trust in terms of what you should actually do and what you shouldn't do? It's so difficult these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that is the only other thing I would add is anything that I would have. I really like the idea of not understanding the killer's motive and that you didn't see his face as well. Right. Making the killer as mysterious as possible would also be something I would definitely reintroduce.
Definitely. Alrighty, so I think we've got the Red Dawn coming up. I think that's another winter theme movie, which with the remake versus the original will be interesting to do and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
And then I think another one that is a little bit down the road is Death Wish, where that's one that is I definitely connected with the Charles Bronson, so it'll be interesting to see, like, you know, another version of that story and stuff.
Yeah, I've already seen one of them. It was pretty interesting.
Alrighty. So yeah, that's all for this time. Thanks again for watching. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Thanks very much.
And we'll see you all at the movies.